Welcome to Journalist Roundtable. I'm Larry Casper. Our guests are Gillian McGoldrick from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Jaxon White from LNP and Lancaster Online, and Steve Ulrich from Politics PA. Steve, let's start with you. President Donald Trump announced his new tariffs on imports coming into the U.S. How is Governor Shapiro reacting?
Surprisingly, Larry, it might surprise some people. Governor Shapiro said at a gathering in Bethlehem yesterday that he's actually supportive of the president's tariffs as long as they work. That he's rooting for America. He wants to see Americans succeed. When Americans succeed, Pennsylvanians succeed, et cetera. But he also lashed out on the previous 70 days of chaos that the Trump administration has really inflicted on the country and the Commonwealth. The fact that we have plans that are being rolled out and then pulled back, grants that are being frozen and unfrozen, there's no real sense of what is the real plan. It almost seems as though we're throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what kind of stuff sticks. President Trump, I think, is hoping to have more foreign companies move to the United States, invest in building plants in the United States, and therefore being able to balance out the trade deficit. But one of the things I heard this morning was you have one island in the South Pacific whose trade deficit with the United States is 90%. Their main export is diamonds. They're not going to be coming to the United States to work on diamonds. So it's situations like that where countries are not going to be able to move to the United States, that's really going to cause some problems. And I think where the governor is concerned, once again, while he still wants to see policies succeed, I think he's able to read the writing on the wall and seeing that the short-term pain, long-term gain strategy of the president may not exactly apply to Pennsylvania.
Gillian, what's your take on the governor's reaction to President Trump's new tariffs?
Yeah, so I think that what his comments were yesterday were pretty interesting because a few weeks ago, after they had initially been announced, the tariffs against Canada and Mexico specifically, Governor Shapiro was very adamant that they quote, make no sense. And he talked about how they will hurt Pennsylvania. Our main export partner internationally is Canada. Our main export partner for the dairy industry is Mexico. So I think that, and Jaxon wrote a really good story about the dairy, the likely impact on the dairy industry. But generally, it does sound like he's taking a little bit of a changed tune. It's been a few weeks since then, but he was very defensive of Canada and as one of our best trade partners.
Jaxon, why not tell us about this story that Gillian just told us about, that you wrote about the possible impact on Pennsylvania's dairy industry of these new tariffs?
Yeah, absolutely. Many of the farmers that I spoke to, some lobbyists, anyone else involved in the dairy industry, they had some concerns. They were fearful that foreign markets like Canada, Mexico, some of the largest importers of U.S. dairy products, would turn elsewhere for cheaper products, and that would sort of leave U.S. dairy farmers stuck competing with each other just over domestic markets. So what they were telling me is they hope that the Trump administration has an end goal here and aren't just raising these tariffs sort of willy-nilly, just as they want to in the next couple of weeks. So they're really hoping that this, in the long run, will open markets long term for them by lowering some of the other countries' tariffs. But otherwise, many of them said they don't see the point or any benefit if there is no long-term goal here.
Steve, what did President Trump mean when he called April 2nd Liberation Day? And I think you've already opened the door a crack on that subject, so why not go through it?
His feeling is that, once again, the short-term pain that Americans are going to feel is going to be outweighed by the long-term gain. He's very adamant on the fact that these tariffs are going to work, that more money is going to be pouring into America. When employers win, employees win. And that's the thought process behind all this. To follow up, though, you take a look at a 25% tariff, let's say it's going to be applied against an Apple MacBook that might cost $750 today. Well, once the tariffs are in place, that's going to cost $937. So you start asking yourself, okay, do I need a new computer now, or do I need to put it off to see if this sticks or not? What happens if you're in the market for a new car? I think while President Trump is saying this is a great thing and we're just going to have to suffer through some tougher times, the market this morning is already down 1,000 points, and it remains to be seen exactly whether or not he'll need to pull back a little bit more, or if this truly liberates the American economy.
How wide is the range for these tariffs? I've heard, for example, as high as 34% for China.
I'm hearing upwards of 50%, and that's because President Trump says he is being kind in all of this. Basically, if your trade deficit is, let's say, 100%, they're cutting it in half, so it will be 50%. That's the thought process behind this. I think, as Joe and Jaxon both mentioned, the fact that originally tariffs were slapped on Canada and Mexico, and those were repealed. I think there are a lot of folks in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives that aren't necessarily sure that's going to happen in the next couple of days, but they want to begin the process of trying to roll these back for our most favored trade partners.
The governor says Pennsylvania is a leader, or in fact, the leader in the United States for exporting hardwood. So that could touch on a whole bunch of industries, couldn't it? Jaxon, how about you?
Yeah, Governor Shapiro has cited a couple of different industries trying to localize the impact that these tariffs would have. He's mentioned agriculture, obviously. The dairy industry is something I wrote about. Lumber is a huge industry, but I believe yesterday's event, Steve might be able to speak a little bit more to this, but I think yesterday's was all about craft beer, actually, because it was at a brewery. So he was really warning about some of the scale here. It's not just about the numbers and percents, but it's also about the impact of how many different industries these tariffs would impact, just since they are sort of blanket reciprocal tariffs at this point.
Now, I'm sure Pennsylvanians are anticipating an impact from these tariffs. Just how soon will they notice the impact on their wallets? Any guesses, Gillian?
No idea. I just know for sure that it has been a little bit more expensive when I personally go to the grocery store right now, and when I've been buying furniture for our new house, it has been a little bit more expensive, but that could just be your run-of-the-mill inflation at this point.
Because that was done. You did that shopping well in advance of the tariffs being announced, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Steve, let's take it back to you. Now, you said that President Trump has this desire to get manufacturing to come back to the United States. So let's consider the global manufacturing community. Are they giving any signs that they'd actually want to do that?
There have been a couple of companies, Larry, that have insinuated that they would, but will Nike stop producing sports apparel, footwear in Vietnam or in China to come back to the United States to do so? Using Nike as the example, how long would it take to actually build a plant and get things up and running? I think there are a lot of questions in regards to the plan that I'm not sure the administration has necessarily answered, certainly not to the satisfaction of Congress. But I think now more and more as these begin to dent our wallets, I think you're going to find the everyday American that's going to ask the same question. How long is this going to be required of us? What's going to be the sacrifice required for myself to wait for a company like Nike to come overseas and begin building and selling their products in America?
Here's another event within the Trump administration that we should pay attention to. And Gillian, I know you were paying attention to this. It has to do with the president canceling public health grants. This was funding, interestingly, that already had been approved by Congress. Gillian, what's the president's reasoning here?
Yeah, so the Health and Human Services Department and the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, sent out these pretty much mass cancellations last week of about $11 billion in Democratic states alone, worth of public health grants that were initially approved related to COVID-19 pandemic recovery, but were largely expanded to include other public health issues, help states build up their public health infrastructures, and three major grants that were canceled in Pennsylvania, totaling about $500 million, were canceled as part of that. That led Governor Shapiro, the New Jersey Attorney General Matt Platkin, and Governor Andy Beshear in Kentucky, and 20 other states, who all joined on a lawsuit of attorneys general, challenging this and trying to get the federal courts to stop these grants from getting canceled, because a lot of them were already budgeted in these states for this fiscal year, for future fiscal years, up through 2027. Some of these grants were approved by Congress already to be allocated throughout states, and that puts a lot of concern. I know in Pennsylvania, like county health departments will be one of the major parts of this that will be really impacted because they rely on these federal funds. Like almost all of Delaware counties, one of the largest counties in the state, almost all of their health department is funded by only federal funds. And then there's also these large statewide databases of tracking different vaccine registry, and those are some of the things that are now at risk, according to the Pennsylvania Department of Health.
I understand the president cited a reason for canceling this public health funding, and his administration said it was, quote unquote, for cause. What does that mean anyway? I need more information. Any of you can try to answer that.
Yeah, I'll take that one. The for cause is that the pandemic is over. So these funds were allocated for the pandemic, and now we are 5 years in, and the pandemic is over, according to the federal government. So that is their cause.
Now, as far as restoring this funding is concerned, Gillian, you did mention that the purpose of the funds has changed somewhat because initially they were for the COVID-19 pandemic, but can we go ahead and justify them by using them for other disease mitigation? Like, of course, measles is in the news.
Yeah, that's what these states argue, is that it will essentially make states less safe, put people at risk, because they will not be able to detect some of these other infections or diseases that are getting around in their states as soon as they would have been able to, had they been able to continue to support their public health infrastructures with these federal funds.
Jaxon, let's turn away from the federal government just for a minute. Consider a story that you worked on. It has to do with creating a new office called the Office of New Pennsylvanians. What is that office and what would it do?
Yeah, so Democratic State Representative Izzy Smith-Waddell from Lancaster County, he introduced this bill, support from some other Democrats in the House, to create a new Office of Pennsylvanians. The whole point of it is to attract and retain immigrants to the state, and help them walk through some of the legal processes and language services that are available to them through the state. And it's also meant to help guide different state departments and agencies in how they interact with immigrants in the community. So the legislation last year, it stalled in the state government committee. But what I'm hearing is that, President Donald Trump's policies targeting immigrants could really push this proposal into the spotlight As you know, House Democrats have control of the chamber, and they're looking for ways to push back at the Trump administration and make statements heading into the next year. So, you know, neither House Majority Leader Matt Bradford or the Senate Majority Leader Joe Pittman really expressed any support. When I tried to contact them, I didn't hear back from them. But you know, it could be interesting to see some of these proposals that might be lesser known or coming from rank and file lawmakers really be pushed to the forefront of negotiations this year in the state, as both of the parties try to figure out what they're going to be focusing on heading into, you know, budget negotiations in June and when things really pick up.
Now, I understand the activities of this office could influence immigrants to move to cities with population decline. And talk about that, Jaxon.
Yeah, the whole point is to really offset some of the population decline that we've seen in Pennsylvania in the last couple of years. That's something that Senate Republicans have really pushed for. So it's largely in 30 cities of the third class that they're aiming for. So cities like Lancaster, but those that have population decline and economic decline, they're hoping to boost that by bringing more immigrants in to boost the workforce, boost, you know, investment into the counties, into those areas, housing stocks, and those sort of economic benefits. The lawmakers who put this bill forward, you know, they cited data from 2018 to say, you know, 7% of Pennsylvanians are immigrants, and they've really generated some, it's about $3.3 billion in state tax revenue. So what these lawmakers are pushing for is sort of offset any upset in the economy by boosting the number of immigrants in a community.
Jaxon, I'm wondering what the inspiration was for the representative that came up with this bill. In other words, as far as you can tell, is this a unique idea? Maybe we got the idea from another state?
So from my conversations, I'm not sure if Representative Smith-Waddell got this from another state, actually. Just from talking with him, he said that he's heard about it in the local community here in Lancaster. I know at a couple of press conferences that he's held, because he introduced this last year, as I mentioned. So it wasn't introduced in response to the Trump administration or anything like that. He pushed for, Representative Smith-Waddell pushed for it last year, but it sounds like most of it came from local voices who he spoke with. Some of the local voices came to different press conferences that he's had for this event, and really have helped try and drive this through the state legislature.
Steve, let's get you involved again and talk about President Trump's plan to eliminate the Department of Education. We've been hearing about that for weeks, maybe months. What does the president hope to achieve by doing this anyway?
Larry, that's a great question. I'm not sure that even the president really knows, other than the fact that he made it a staple of his campaign, that he would search out waste and eliminate it where needed. He didn't like the way that the department had, in his mind, probably gone more woke than most conservatives would prefer in this situation, whether it was support of transgender folks participating in college athletics, whether it be funneling tuition vouchers to parents so they can determine whether a child should go to a public school or go to a private school. I think that his team just felt that the easiest way to take care of a lot of this would be to eliminate the federal Department of Education and spread it back out to the states. Now, ironically, there's a proposal in the Pennsylvania Senate right now to eliminate the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So it seems as though this has become a Republican marching point for everyone to fall behind and eliminate. It's causing a lot of angst among particularly Pennsylvania colleges and universities right now when you talk about federal funds that are being frozen, primarily in research. You know, you take a school like University of Pittsburgh or Carnegie Mellon, if they have $500 million of federal funding frozen for research that they're currently ongoing, to keep that funding, to keep that research alive is going to require the university to find $500 million. And the question then becomes, well, what do we want to keep? Do we want to keep doing the research? Do we want to eliminate something else on campus to be able to pay for it? And it's forcing colleges and universities in the Commonwealth, who right now are really facing a demographic cliff when it comes to enrollment. Just one more problem that's being put on the laps of university presidents, chancellors, and boards of trustees.
Steve, as far as the federal Department of Education is concerned, what has the Trump administration done so far? Tangible evidence. For example, have they cut loose employees?
They have cut about, I think it's closing in on half of the staff with the Department of Education. And I know there's a lot of researchers that are concerned that the data that is constantly compiled by the Federal Department of Education that's shared nationally is going to disappear from websites. So there's a lot of retrenching going on right now. Linda McMahon really dodged a lot of questions during her confirmation hearings for Secretary of Education. And once again, I think going back to the early part of the discussion, we talked about Governor Shapiro talking about the chaos. It's just, I think decision makers right now, not only in Harrisburg, but in Washington, aren't really sure what the plan is other than just begin to reduce the federal workforce as much as possible.
Is there any way to anticipate possible effects on federal funding for education in Pennsylvania?
Right now, I would say it's really hard to get a read on where things are going to go. The president has tried the federal freeze. It's been pulled back. Judges have gotten involved. The judicial system will probably end up making the call on the actual impact overall on the Commonwealth. But there are 67 independent colleges and universities in Pennsylvania. You have the state-supported universities, your Penn State, your Pitt, your Temple. Certainly you have the PASHE institutions that are all currently heading into their spring Board of Trustees meetings without answers and not knowing what is going to transpire. And that's just causing a lot of angst on campus.
Steve, one more question on this subject. We know the president is fond of the executive order. Is this something he expects to achieve through executive order?
I believe so. I believe that he has found that it's much easier to circumvent Congress and not have to deal with the length of time it could take to actually put a law into place. It's much easier just to sign an executive order and see if it will stand up under judicial review. And I think that is the game plan. It will continue to be the game plan going forward.
Gillian, let's consider a story you worked on. It has to do with the home health care industry. And let's start with a real basic question and try to be brief. What's the supply and demand as far as home care health jobs are concerned?
Yeah, there's about 112,000 shifts per month in Pennsylvania that go unfilled. So that's 112,000 times that somebody needed some sort of home care, a nurse, a CNA, someone to come in and make sure that they're safe, make sure that they are getting they're eating, etc., doing any sort of other care.
And what is in the governor's budget, if anything, to ameliorate this situation?
Yeah, the home care association, the major association representing about 300,000 home care workers in agencies, was really disappointed by Governor Shapiro's budget proposal. He only proposed actually funding the non-agency home care workers. It's about 8,500 workers, or about 6% of the total workforce.
Let's talk about a special election that took place in Senate District 36. And I understand that you all covered that election. And first of all, let's start with the question, why was that special election necessary? Jaxon, how about you?
Yeah, so former State Senator Ryan Aument resigned from his seat. He's held since 2014. He resigned that seat to accept a job with U.S. Senator Dave McCormick's office. That was back in December. And since then, the parties, sort of ran their rushed processes for choosing their candidates. And then the special election was on March 25th. It was with the district there, the 36th Senate District covers a northern chunk of Lancaster County. It's majority of Republican voters, and it was really viewed as County Commissioner Josh Parsons' race to lose at that point, just because the district hadn't elected a Democrat since 1889. It's a historically Republican district. It's deep red. But when the polls closed and results came back, I think it was announced at 10:12 p.m. was the last poll that was filed. Democrat James Malone had won the seat by just 482 votes. So it was a major upset for the Republican Party here in Lancaster County. And, I'm sure someone else can talk about it if they would like, but, there was a lot of national attention on this race because the National Democratic Party is really trying to tie it to discontent with the Trump administration and some of the trends that we're seeing in other special elections around the country.
Gillian, take about a minute to tell us about the background of James Malone, the winner in this race. Who is this gentleman? Where did he come from?
Yeah, he's an unpaid mayor. He was an unpaid mayor of borough, East Petersburg in Lancaster. And yeah, Jaxon has, I'm sure, spent a lot more time with him than I have. But it is fascinating because he has probably really low name recognition, and he beat a longtime county commissioner who has a lot of control in the county GOP. Overall, it was fascinating to see sort of this like no-name guy get national attention for flipping the seat.
And an interesting point too is James Malone isn't a Lancaster County native. He's from out of state. He moved here just over a decade, so he's been here for a long time. But Josh Parsons is born and raised in Lancaster County his entire life, has been a member of the Republican Party since he was young. There's a lot of interesting dynamics here.
Steve, we only have about 2 minutes left in our program. I'd like to cover one more topic, and it is important because it has to do with mail-in ballots here in Pennsylvania. There was a recent federal court ruling that addressed the mail-in ballots. We know there was controversy over ballots that didn't have a date or they had the wrong date, and the federal court spoke, and what did they say, Steve?
Well, as a former York County election director, this one hits close to home because Judge Susan Baxter, a Trump appointee, had originally left stand the ruling that a date was required on the outer envelope of a mail-in ballot, and the date had to fall in between the time that the ballot was actually mailed out of the county election office up until 8 p.m. on election day. Two citizens, along with Fetterman for PA and the Republican Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, filed another lawsuit claiming that in doing so, it violated the First and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, making it harder for people to vote. And this time, Judge Baxter agreed with the plaintiffs, thereby allowing undated mail-in ballots now to be accepted by Pennsylvania. Most likely, Larry, this will continue through the spring primary. We would expect, because it always is, to be challenged once again in courts. So we may have a different situation when we come to November with the municipal elections.
Our guests have been Gillian McGoldrick from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Jaxon White from LNP and Lancaster Online, and Steve Ulrich from Politics PA. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is it for Journalist Roundtable. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.